Okay, hi everyone. This is going to be the lecture for Chapter 12. We're going to be talking about international sustainability reporting. So, sustainability reporting is a relatively recent phenomenon. Maybe the last 10, 20 years it's been growing and come to rise. What we're talking about here with sustainability reporting is like a secondary type of reporting to financial accounting. That is to say, we're looking at a report a business would make that it looks at and examines its societal and environmental impacts. Many large public accounting firms today practice some form of sustainability reporting, and there's various names, when they talk about sustainability reporting that it could refer to. So if you ever see like corporate social responsibility reporting, CSR, the triple bottom line, or environmental, social, and governance reporting, ESG, those kind of all mean sustainability reporting, having our company disclose information about how we impact society. So in sustainability reporting, areas that are examined include the environment, social capital, human capital, the business model, leadership, and governance. With regard to human capital and fair labor, we're looking at is our business acting in such a way that it's fair, safe, and promoting ethical labor conditions. So Nike, for example, has historically been criticized for how it produces its shoes and sources them. Do they use, as it were, sweatshop labor? So in response to this, Nike has disclosed its supply chain information in its sustainability reports. Likewise, the environment, right? How much does our business emit greenhouse gases, or how much fossil fuel do we use as a business? We may report on our emission data in the sustainability report. Further, social capital, how accessible and affordable are our products? So a pharmaceutical company, right? They may report on their drug prices and access to their drug costs in poor countries. So is this reasonable, what we're doing? Then business model and innovation. We're looking at, is our product, a quality product? Is it safe? For example, McDonald's, they're going to provide reports on their consumption statistics. So sustainability reporting, as I've indicated, has been a big deal over the last 20 years. Why has it happened? Two kind of theories for it, a stakeholder theory and a legitimacy theory. The stakeholder theory basically says, hey, our stakeholders, people who are interested and have a claim in our business, whether it's a shareholder or society, they've been making demands and we're responding to those. Legitimacy theory says something like, in order to be a legitimate business, we do have to respond to political, economic, and social concerns in the world. So when we're talking about companies, right, investors, we can classify them into two categories. Traditional investors who are very financially oriented, care about the profit and loss. And then we would have socially responsible investors who, while they do care about the profit and loss, they also care about issues that you would find in a sustainability report. So one thing interesting about sustainability reporting, research studies have shown that companies who care about social and environmental causes tend to outperform their peers on a financial basis. So sometimes going green can actually be a financial winner as well. And one of the interesting things, the other kind of correlation with this is companies who tend to care about these issues also tend to have other important factors such as like a strong corporate governance, proper investment strategy, energy conservation, and risk management. Now, when you're talking about socially responsible investors, they do make up a reasonably large share of the market. In other words, of the roughly 40 trillion of assets under investment in the USA, nearly 8 or 9 of those are held by socially responsible investors. It's almost like a fourth. And if you were to go up to a socially responsible investor and say, like, how do you pick your stocks? They could say, well, we have kind of a negative screening mechanism and a positive screening mechanism. So the negative screening mechanism would say, what do we want to avoid, right? So we don't want to potentially invest in coal stocks, right? Because that's not good for the environment. Well, on the opposite side, right, the positive screening mechanism basically says we're going to look for and affirmatively invest in companies who display characteristics that we like. So maybe a company that is dealing with alternative energy development would be a good stock. One thing with sustainability reporting, and we'll see this echoed throughout the rest of the chapter here, is that by and large it's going to be voluntary. So companies don't have to, depending on the country you live in, specifically in the United States, you don't have to release any type of sustainability report. Accordingly, any company who does release a sustainability report, it's kind of like the wild, wild west with regard to the standards and what type of report they want to release. And what happens here is, because there's not a fixed set of standards that are forced, companies can pick and choose what they want to report in their sustainability report. So maybe they just only talk about the good things and ignore any bad things they're doing. For that reason, a lot of people call sustainability reports, propaganda more than substance. So it's the term for this is greenwashing. You're not really disclosing everything. You're just showing us the good stuff, right? Now, while we don't have a universally required sustainability report or a standard setter, we do have initiatives and bodies who are working towards this. And the biggest really recognized one is this Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI. They're a group of individuals from business, society, labor, and other professional institutions who have made standards for sustainability reporting. Now, with regard to those standards, they kind of examine four different areas. So like universal, economic, environmental, and social standards. How they measure these can be quantitative, like number driven, how much emission data or how much emission have you used by weight, right? Or it can be qualitative, more like descriptive and explanatory. So please tell us how you supply your goods in your business. Are you trying to avoid child labor in the supply stream? This is just showing some of those standards. Now, one of the kind of complaints about sustainability reporting, if you're a business, you may say, well, while we care about these issues, right, this guidance you're giving us, it's a lot to report on, right? There's so many topics. This can be an information overload. The cost of compliance can be worth more than the benefit of the report. So in response to this, the GRI really relies on a materiality threshold. That is to say, they basically are positing that you need to make a disclosure if it's material. And material means this is something a reasonable investor would want to know about. So the GRI, that's one of the larger bodies, right, who have been providing standards for sustainability reporting. However, we do have other, as it were, players in the game here who are making standards. And these can be like comprehensive standards, like they're trying to directly compete with the GRI, like address and concern all of these different topics, or they can be like an issue-specific standard center. So, for example, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which we'll talk about, these are becoming more common and prevalent in the US. It's basically a generalized framework or standards for reporting. Whereas in distinction, right, the Carbon Disclosure Project, this may look at just reporting standards for carbon only, like just the environment. So as we've discussed, right, sustainability reporting by and large is still a voluntary system, depending on which country you live in. In the US, again, it's not required. However, we are moving towards potentially it being required in the future. So we're going to look at here some governments who've adopted and required a form of sustainability reporting, and then looking at what other countries are doing. So the EU, right, in 2014, they created a directive that requires member nations to implement some form of sustainability reporting. So the EU, it is required. Many countries use the GRI, that's an appropriate framework, and how they implement that can vary from country to country. So Germany may implement it one way, where France could do it another way. In distinction, right, another area where sustainability reporting has been, imported or used in a certain capacity is on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So they have taken a disclose or explain approach for certain issues. And that is to say, in order to be listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, you need to disclose or explain things that involve air pollution, hazardous waste, energy consumption, product safety, so on and so forth. Now, in the US, right, we don't have a formal law requiring sustainability reporting. It's still voluntary. The closest thing we do have is SEC regulations on climate disclosure. So as of right now, the only thing companies, publicly traded companies subject to certain SEC rules, they have to disclose on their 10K information related to how they comply with environmental laws and other issues involving the environment. So we kind of like incrementally are there with just regard to the environment, but we don't have that broader scope. Now, one really big movement in the US has been the formation of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the SASB. So if you remember from financial accounting and what we've talked about, you have the FASB, right, with an F. They make the rules for GAAP, right? FASB makes GAAP. It's like the entity that sets the standards. What they've created is this thing called the SASB, which essentially is like the FASB, but they're going to be making rules for sustainability reporting. And again, it's not required right now, but with the formation of this entity, if you told me in 5, 10, 15 years that there were requirements on this, I wouldn't be surprised. So we're moving in this direction. So you can look at this here. This is kind of comparing the SASB with the GRI. So it could end up becoming something like IFRS versus GAAP, right? We may have two kind of competing things, one thing we use in the USA versus one thing we use around the world. It would be nice if they recognize this up front, but I think part of the issue with using the GRI, and at least in the United States, is we're more of a shareholder-centric company or country. So whereas the GRI might be more of a stakeholder view. And we're looking at what investors would want to know, where they're looking at like what society wants to know. The next thing here, we have a few slides on specific areas of sustainability reporting, and then we'll look at some sections of sustainability reports from real companies. So with regard to carbon emissions, oil and gas, each of the world's major oil companies factor climate change considerations into the internal analyses of future capital investments. What they do is incorporate the internal carbon price into capital budgeting models. I have here, for example, Chevron integrates climate change risk into strategic and business planning. So they are aware, of these impacts on the environment and incorporate it accordingly into their projects. The other thing here is the greenhouse gas protocol. This provides the basis for reporting, which is used by virtually all of the world's sustainability reporting frameworks, including the GRI. So basically the GRI, like when they're saying, hey, you have to report on greenhouse gas, they look to the greenhouse gas protocol to help establish the standards. And really, one of the big thing they're looking at there is the how they measure it is the carbon dioxide equivalent. How much carbon dioxide equivalent are you using? Now, when they look at carbon emissions under the greenhouse gas protocol, things they're looking at here are direct, indirect, and other indirect emissions. So direct emissions would be like directly how much carbon are you emitting. Indirect would be like how do we trace the amount of carbon you use with regard to electricity, heat, or steam in your business. The third one here is like kind of interesting, and I'm not sure that this is necessarily a fair standard. They use other indirect emissions. So they look at your supply chain. Where do you buy your products from? Who do you sell them to? And then they say, how do those companies, upstream and downstream in the supply chain, what are their effects on the environment, and how much carbon emission, are they using? So that's one's a little bit harder to trace, right? Because you have to be aware of what other companies are doing. So one thing with sustainability reporting, say you're in a country that requires it, or you do voluntarily disclose it. So in the same way that we have auditing for financial statements, right? If you want accurate, reliable, trustworthy financial statements, you would get them audited. The equivalent of that for sustainability reporting would be receiving external assurance. Basically, what you would do is, hey, I have a sustainability report. I would like an external third party to examine this and assure or verify the claims in the report are accurate and fair. So getting assurance, is voluntary, again, depending on the country you live in. Still, even though it's voluntary, half of the reports in the GRI database are externally assured. So we've talked about some overarching frameworks with sustainability reporting. Let's look at some examples here with different companies about what they might disclose or how they choose to implement sustainability reporting. So Mazda, right? This is a Japanese company. Obviously, they produce cars, and it publishes a separately stated sustainability report. And in that report, they say, hey, we conform with the GRI. That's the standards we use to help produce this report. And things we're going to be looking at and discussing in here of high importance include energy or water usage, emissions, health and safety, diversity, and equal opportunity. With regard to greenhouse gases, we're going to report on our indirect emissions related to carbon use from our products. So you could see, right, that with cars and carbon, that could be a rather large number. So this is just showing, that report. You can look at it here. You can see it's interesting, right? Have the units differ depending on what's being measured. IKEA, the next one, right? This is the furniture store. So while it was founded in Sweden, it's headquartered in the Netherlands. They get EY to externally assure their report. And the idea with IKEA is they're GRI informed. That is to say, they use principles from, but they do not fully conform with the GRI. Now, this is where I was saying there's kind of like the Wild West, right? If you're GRI informed, what does that mean? Like, are you only using the parts of the GRI that are going to produce good results? So you have to kind of look at this with a little bit of a skeptic's eye just to make sure you're fairly looking at it. But in what they do disclose, right, they look at things like where do they source their wood from, making sure it's sustainable outlets, where do they get their products from, and then are our labor standards fair? A third one here, Baxter International. This is a large medical product company in the USA. They use the GRI system. It's externally assured. Because it's a medical product company, obviously product safety is going to have a lot of disclosures in there. And then finally, here we have ExxonMobil. So with regard to Exxon, like IKEA, they're going to be GRI informed, meaning that not in full compliance with the GRI, but they use some of their principles. Things they're going to look at are a variety of climate-related disclosures. And in their 10K, right, they also look at climate-related factors. Specifically, what they're looking at here are how climate regulations could reduce oil consumption, and what is the standard or how alternative energy is going to impact them. So with this, we're going to end this lecture. There are no associated problems from the publisher on it. So if you're studying for the exam on this, I would say just review the PowerPoint, listen to the lecture, make sure you watch any associated videos in Blackboard.